Hi, my name is Miriam, and this is the Black TV Show podcast. This is where I talk about my favorite TV show episodes, currently talking about season 2 of The Cosby Show. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 35, The Cosby Show season 2, episode 12, Mrs. Westlake. This episode aired January 2nd, 1986. Wow, it really aired a day after New Year's. Usually sitcoms on network television, they usually wait a week before restarting the year of their schedule. So it's so weird that this actually aired a day after New Year's. Maybe it was different back then. So we start off with Rudy is reading a book and Cliff is sleeping and she's like sitting on him in the living room on the couch. She's trying to read this book, but she's having trouble saying some of the words. I am that person. You probably have already noticed that on this podcast how much I cannot say certain words. I don't know why. English is my first language, although it isn't the first language I've learned. I believe I learned 2 other languages before learning English, but then I forgot those 2 other languages once I started going to school. But yeah, English is my main language and I still can't say certain words. So I'm with you on this, Rudy, okay? So she's trying to learn how to say yarn, and so she gets Cliff to get up to help say the word. And it's yarn, and he says yarn. And then she keeps reading her book and she gets to basket. And then so she goes to Cliff and says, "What is this word?" And he says basket. And so then finally Cliff says, "Let's read this book together." So they read the book and then finally it's the end. And so Cliff was like, "Oh, so should we read another book?" And Rudy was like, "No, I think you're tired." And so he was like, "You're right. Clearly, we figured that out." So she leaves and he goes back to trying to sleep. But instead, Theo comes in and wakes him up. He came home from basketball practice. Theo tells Cliff that, he didn't really concentrate well at the basketball practice because he was thinking about this math test. It was a killer. It had 20 questions, no multiple choice, and you couldn't use a calculator. So Theo's in grade 10. I remember once I got to high school, we rarely used calculators. Before going to high school, we didn't use calculators, and then once we got to high school, we used them, which it always confused me. I was like, if we know how to add and subtract and multiply in our head and divide in our head, why do we have calculators? And then you realize, oh, the math is crazy hard in high school. So I don't know what kind of math they were doing, but I remember I was that person that loved math. As I said, English, it was never my subject. I have bad grammar to this day. I can't spell at this age. Like it's pretty sad. But math was my strong point. I love learning math, and especially in high school, it was like, I guess trying to solve problems were like fun for me. Like I love doing like Sudoku and all that. And at one point when I was in grade 11, I took grade 12 math and it was pre-cal. So it's like the hardest of all the math. And I took that in grade 11 because in grade 12, my school had the option of doing university calculus in grade 12, and our math teacher would teach that. And I literally in grade 12 went to the university that I ended up going to and did the midterm exam and the final exam in grade 12 for a calculus course, and I ended up getting an A on it, so it was a great choice for me to do it. And yeah, so math has just always been my thing. So I always like question people like, how are you having issues? But I understand like these problems, you really need to have a certain mind for them. Multiple choice, I didn't know that multiple choice was a thing in math, because when I was in high school, like you had to solve problems and you had to use formula and equations to figure that out. So I don't know why you want multiple choice. I'm not sure. That's a thing for like science. I feel like if you take a science course, you'd rather have multiple choice. So yeah, so there's 20 questions, no multiple choice, and no calculator. And during the test, no one was breathing. And when the bell rang, everyone gave the test to Mrs. Westlake, and no one said a word to her. And Theo was like, poor cockroach. He never even went past the question number 3. So we have yet to meet Cockroach. He is in the next couple episodes. I can't remember what episode, but there is an episode that he's going to start coming in way more often in the next couple of episodes. But yeah, so he didn't make it past question number. So Cliff asks Theo, like, did he answer all 20 questions? And Theo was like, yeah, I answered all 20 questions to the best that I can. But saying that, you know, he doesn't feel as confident that he got a good mark. And Theo was like, you know, I'm still so worried about Cockroach, because when he was in the parking lot, I heard him saying, you know, I didn't even pass question number 3. And so the phone rings, and Theo picks it up, and the woman wants to talk to Cliff. And so he asks who the woman is, and she says Mrs. Westlake, his math teacher. And he freaks out. He's like, oh my God, this is Mrs. Westlake, like, and she wants to talk to you. And Cliff was like, okay, well, give me the phone. And so Cliff starts hearing what she wants. We find out that, you know, she's asked if she can see him. And we'll find out why in the later part of this episode. And so Cliff was like, okay, well, do you want to come over for dinner? And Theo was like, no, I don't want her here, you know? And so, and Mrs. Westlake asked, like, can I bring my husband? And Cliff was like, yeah, for sure, bring your husband over. Theo starts making all this noise. And Cliff asks, are you landing an airplane? And Theo says, I don't want you to invite her over. And Cliff is like, it's too late. I invited her over. And so he says to Mrs. Westlake, I'll see you later, and puts the phone down. And Cliff was like, I didn't know that your teacher had an accent. And Theo was like, whatever, I don't really care about the accent, but what does she want? And Cliff says, you know, she wants to see him. And Theo says, oh, it has to be the test. That is the reason why she's going to wants to see him. And, like, Cliff is like, you don't know that, you know? And Theo says, like, you didn't even ask me to invite Mrs. Westlake. And Cliff was like, what? Can you say that again? And so Theo says, you didn't even ask me to invite Mrs. Westlake for dinner. And Cliff was like, wait a minute. So he goes to the desk and he says, he gets all the bills. He has a bill for the water bill. He has the mortgage, the electricity, and there is no mention of Theo's name on any of these bills. So Cliff was like he doesn't need to ask Theo who he can invite to the house. Like, that's not, he doesn't have that position. And Theo says, you know, if I pay for the water, will you call her back? And Cliff was like, no. And so Theo goes upstairs, and while he's going to his room, he calls out for Denise to come into his room. And he's just freaking out and telling Denise, you know, I forgot what he said, but, you know, the teacher is, Mrs. Westlake is coming. Like, Theo started to think of ways to avoid this dinner, and he's like, maybe I should break my arm or something. And Denise says, it's just only a couple of hours. And Theo says, you know, and Theo's like, what happens if, like, my friends find out? You know, I'll always be the student that is known for being the guy that had dinner with Mrs. Westlake. You know, that's not great. I'm trying to think to myself, have I ever had dinner with any of my teachers? I don't think so. I was never close to any of my teachers, to be honest. Well, maybe my gym teacher in elementary school. He's known me even past me leaving high school, and he only taught me in from grade 1 to 8. But yeah, no, I've never had dinner. Let me know if you've had dinner with your teacher. For me, at this point in my life, I am friends with 2 teachers. They're one of them is a high school science teacher, and the other one, she teaches elementary student kids. And they're newly teachers, and so I'm friends with teachers. So it's like, when you think about it, it's like these teachers that have taught us, you know, when you grow up, you're like, oh my God, they probably have boring lives. And we find out during this episode, like, you know, teachers are just like us. They have their own lives. They enjoy the same things that we enjoy. And so it's weird to think about it now I have 2 friends that are also teachers, and probably their students think of them as they have boring lives in their personal lives. So yeah. But let me know if you guys have had, you know, a teacher over. I want to hear your stories. Was it as bad as what Theo is trying to think of, with Mrs. Westlake. So Denise says that she won't be there for the dinner, and Theo freaks out, like, why? Like, you need to be here. And she's like, well, I promised Monica that I'm going shopping with her. Really? Is that a thing? Like, you promise someone to go shopping? I guess that is a thing in high school. I remember, the mall was my life. The mall nowadays, it ain't my life, especially with this pandemic, no, like, half the time being closed. So Theo says, like, just stay, like, and Denise is like, I can't. And Denise tells Theo, good luck. And so it's the evening time, and Theo has a tie on, and he looks nice. And Theo sees Cliff bringing hors d'oeuvres to the table. And, like, Theo's like, what are you doing? And Cliff says, I'm putting hors d'oeuvres for the guests, like how I always do. And Theo's like, why? Because I always do it. That is why. And Theo says, can't we just go, this is just going to make this evening longer. Can't we just go straight to dinner and eat? And Cliff has suggested that, what if I put the food in the brown paper bag and leave it outside for them to eat out there on the sidewalk? And Theo was like, yeah, for sure. Go ahead. I was like, no, Theo, no, that's not right. And so Theo starts straightening up the pillows. And Cliff is like, what are you doing now? And so he says, in class, like every day in the morning, Mrs. Westlake comes into the room and makes sure that our desks are all in order. And, Cliff says, maybe we should get Mrs. Westlake to go up into his room because we know his room is always messy. And he's like, no, that's not happening. And so Theo starts describing Mrs. Westlake to Cliff, so Cliff is aware how she looks like. And the way he describes her is that she stands up straight in class with her tight bun, with her glasses on the tip of her nose so she can look down on them. Cliff says, oh, she must be rough. And Theo says, well, I feel sorry for her husband because he has to live with her and he probably has to put his hands up if he wants to go use the washroom. What is this? Like, he really thinks, like, a teacher does not have a personal life. Like, it's crazy to think. Like, I'll be honest, the one teacher that teaches elementary student kids, the mind that she has is not even near close to what you would think of a teacher of an elementary school student. Like, it's just crazy to me, like, now thinking of it, like, the teachers I've had, they've had their own personal lives. They probably were wild at one point and all that stuff. And, like, Theo's just like, this woman is so straight points, she doesn't she doesn't have fun, basically. So Theo goes into the kitchen and sees Vanessa is eating. And Theo's like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm eating dinner. And Theo asks Claire, like, why isn't she going to eat with us? And Claire mentions that, Vanessa has a science fair meeting that she needs to go to. And so Theo's like, what about Rudy? Where is she? And Claire says Rudy's staying at Peter's house. And Theo was like, I'm the only one with Mrs. Westlake that she's going to pick on. And Theo asked Vanessa if she can stay for dinner. And Vanessa was like, I can't. Like, I have to go. And Vanessa even mentioned, she was like, I don't know why you're so worried about it. Like, if I had my teacher over, I would be happy about it. I would be happy of having that teacher over for dinner. So they start talking about, like, what issues that can come up during this dinner, like the mistakes that he can make during dinner. Like, Theo spills the gravy all over her lap, and Theo was like, are we having gravy for dinner? And Claire was like, no gravy for dinner. Vanessa says it could be worse, where she, asks for, the salt and you end up sneezing on her arm. And Claire says, you need to stop that. Like, you'd be also nervous too if your teacher was coming over. And Vanessa's like, well, yeah, true, but I don't call my teacher a dragon lady behind her back. And the doorbell rings and Vanessa's like, oh, here she is here. And so we go to the living room set, and Cliff opens the door, and it's Mr. and Mrs. Westlake. But Cliff looks very confused and asks, who are they? And Mr. Westlake says, hi, my name is Mr. Westlake. And Cliff just starts laughing, and Mrs. Westlake was like, what's going on? Why is this dude laughing? I thought he invited us over, And so Cliff calls for Theo to come in and he gets him into the living room and says, "Hi, here is your teacher with the bun in the head." Oh, man. That's a great way to meet someone and introduce them and invite them into your house. So we end Act 1 and we go into Act 2. And Theo is standing in the background while, the adults are, mingling in a way. And Claire tells Theo to sit down. And so he sits down at that table that's on the back right side. And he sits down at a desk. And Mrs. Westlake was like, "Come sit beside me. I'm not going to bite." And Theo's like, "Okay, I don't want..." Like, he's just dreading this. And so Claire asks, like, where Mrs. Westlake is from. And she also mentions, like, "Oh, my name's Anna Marie. You can just go with that." And she says, and when Claire asks her, like, Jack, is it Jack? Yeah, Jack responds first. He's like, "Oh, I'm from Indiana." And Claire was like, no, I mean, Anna Marie. And she says, "Oh, I'm from Brazil." And all of a sudden, Claire starts speaking Portuguese to Anna Marie, and they start having a whole conversation. And within that conversation, like, I think Anna Marie was asked, first of all, I don't know it. I don't know Portuguese either. As I said, I don't know French, I don't know Spanish, and no Portuguese. But what I've heard, like, the way that they were talking about it sounded like Anna Marie asked her when did she learn Portuguese, and Claire was like, "Oh, I was in Brazil for 2 months." I actually heard that part within the conversation, because when you hear basic terminology from different languages, a lot of languages all mixed together, so you kind of get what they're saying. So it sounded like that we find out that Claire was in Brazil for 2 months at some point in her life. And so Cliff, he's hearing this conversation, and he's like, no. We're not having this happening tonight. We're all talking American. Excuse me, American? I thought they were talking English. What is American language? Can someone tell me what the American language is? Like, what? Is he telling us that English is the American language? Excuse me, because a lot of countries have English as their main language, including my own home country, Canada. So why is he saying American? He should said English language, and I don't like that sometimes, when I was in history class, I was told that, America is a melting pot, and even Americans say that, where they basically like leave their own cultures to become one culture as the American people. And Canada is more of a cultural mosaic where we embrace everyone's cultural diversity. And so, like, the way he said it that way, it kind of hit a nerve to me when he said American, because they're speaking English. And so Anna Marie says that she is from Rio. And Cliff was like, "Oh, Rio, my city, And Claire was like, "You've never been there?" And Cliff says, "Because my wife never let me go." And so Jack says, "Oh, you should definitely go to Rio, especially during Carnival." And I'm like, oh, my God, we need to get out of this pandemic, because I really want to go to Carnival. I want to go to Carnival in Trinidad first, and then probably Brazil. I remember when I was in Rome last year, I met a person that literally, I met him during the night, and within 2 days later, he was flying to Brazil for the Carnival, and I got to see like what he experienced, and it looked so much fun. And I was like, oh my God, why am I in Rome? Why should I be in Brazil? But of course, it's too far of a country, too far of a distance. But yeah, I would love to see Carnival in Brazil and also in Trinidad. And Jack says that, they were up all night dancing in the street. And Theo is shocked to hear this. Like, his teacher was up all night partying on the streets of Rio. Like, he really thinks that his teacher doesn't have a personal life. That's basically what I'm saying throughout this whole episode, because as I said, I have 2 friends that are teachers, and we do crazy stuff probably on our own time, or the way we talk might not be appropriate for you think of a teacher talking about, but That's because, teachers have their own personal lives, the way that they want to live their life, and then they have their professional life as teachers. And so Jack says that, we might not be going to Carnival this year. And Claire was like, you're happy about that? And he was like, well, we were happy of whatever is stopping us from going, like the reason of them, the thing that's stopping them from going to Carnival this year. And then Anna Marie says in Portuguese to Claire that she is pregnant. And like Cliff was like, what's going on? And all of a sudden, Claire says out loud, she thinks she's pregnant. And Theo is just in shock. And Anna Marie called because she wants Cliff to be her doctor. And Cliff says, oh, why did you just say that on the phone? And Anna Marie was like, well, you never let me, you didn't give me a chance. And which is true, because he like right away was like, oh, do you want to come over for dinner? Instead of like listening, it seemed like he didn't listen to what she wanted to like continue saying. And so Theo asks, oh, does that mean you're not finishing the school year? And Anna Marie was like, oh, I'm finishing off the school year. If I am pregnant now, I won't have the baby until the summer. And Theo's like, oh, great. Because he thought he was like not going to have her for the whole year. He's probably hoping for a substitute that didn't care about math as much. And so, and Anna Marie mentions that she is taking a year off from work to raising the baby, which I was like surprised about, because in America right now, I think the longest you can be away from your work is like 2 months, I believe. I don't know if things have changed in the 80s, like if in the 80s they were having a year maternity leave. I'm not sure. Here in Canada, we have a 1 year maternity leave, which is great. I love that, because I feel like it's hard for mothers to go back to work after 2 months. Like the baby, you really need a whole year. I think that's the case. But good on her, to take a year off. And, Cliff mentions to Theo, you were fortunate to have her when you had the chance, because now next year the students that come behind won't have her, right? And Theo's like, yeah, but he's not like happy when he says yeah. And he ends up going to the kitchen and he gets a soda, and Cliff comes in, and Theo's like, that is not the Mrs. Westlake that I was talking about. Not the one that he knows. And he mentions, like, first off, she looks good. She has her hair down, glasses off, she is wearing makeup, and she also says something funny. Like, he really thinks of, like, the way he has his perspective of teachers is, like, that they're not human beings, that they're something else. Like, the way he's talking about them, like, Theo says that woman, a woman like her, I can get an A's from. So basically saying that she's different. She's a different person. And Cliff asks, "What is your point?" And Theo says, "She can't fool me." He knows that what Mrs. Westlake is doing. She came over to wait for the right time to tell him what he got on the math test. And then she's going to want to drop a bomb on him in his own home. And that would be a dream come true to her. Really? Like, I think she's looking for your best interest, okay? And Cliff thinks that Theo is losing his mind, which is true. And so we cut to later on, and they've just finished dinner, and Cliff is cracking up some jokes, and Theo doesn't think any of the jokes are funny. And Anna Marie talks about, when she first came to America, and she would stay up late learning English. But people weren't using the English that she was learning. They spoke a diner English because she worked at a diner, and while she was going to school. They would ask, like, give me Adam and Eve on the raft. And Claire was like, two poached eggs on toast. And she worked at we find out that Claire also worked at a diner at one point. And I've never heard of these terminology. Like, I really want to know. Like, can you guys let me know? Is this a thing in the diner to have a different saying for, like, having eggs and waffle and stuff? Let me know at Black TV Shows Pod. And so Cliff tries to jump in and says, give me a frog dried up and leave the liver in. And Claire was like, what is that? What is that? And he's like, that's exactly what it is. And so everyone starts laughing except for Theo. He's just not into these jokes. And Anna Marie said that she worked 3 years at the diner when she went to school, and on the weekends she drove a cab. And Theo was just shocked that she actually drove a cab. And she mentions that the first night wasn't easy. The person asked her to go to the airport and says, stab on it. And Anna was like, stab on what? Stab on the airport? And everyone's laughing except for Theo yet again. And the person says, I need you to get to the airport in a jiffy. And Anna says, this is not a jiffy. This is a yellow cab. And so Claire asks, like, did the man ever made it to the airport? And Jack responds and says, yeah, but I missed my flight. And Cliff and Claire starts to think of the story so cute. They're like, na 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 na. You know, they start singing away, and like Theo's just not into this. And Claire points out, you work 2 jobs while you're going to college. And Anna Marie was like, I didn't mind the work because she was in America. She knew if she worked hard, she would be whatever she wanted to be. And that is the reason why she is so hard on Theo with the math class. And Cliff says, oh yeah, well, Theo tells us that, he gets a lot of attention in your class. And like Theo's just like, can you stop talking about this? Please stop talking about this. And Cliff brings up the first episode of this season in season 2, the first day of school, where he talks about Mrs. Westlake, saying, I dreaded all summer and I end up getting Mrs. Westlake. He brings up that story, how and the fact that he got homework on the first day. And she mentions like on the second day, she knew that he did his homework because when she asked for volunteers to go on the blackboard, he tried to hide behind the person. And so she knew he was not prepared, and she was hoping that for him to go up on the blackboard, that she hoped that he would end up studying more, which he did. She points out that she knows that he knows more now. And Claire says, I don't know if Theo knows it or not, but he is lucky to have you as a teacher. And Anna says, I get excited when kids know what they're doing with their homework or their work. She doesn't like when children take education for granted, and that is why she's tough, even though they call her the Dragon Lady. And Theo's like, who calls you that? And she says, all my students call me that, but I'm happy. When they name me, that means I'm doing my job. And the beeper goes off, and Cliff is like, that's not my beeper. And Jack is like, oh, it's my beeper. Can I use the phone? And so he goes use the phone. Mrs. Westlake wants to talk to Theo in the living room. So Mrs. Westlake goes, and Theo's like, oh no, what's going to happen? And so they go into the living room, and Mrs. Westlake says, oh, I enjoyed being here with your parents. And while she's doing this, she's tying up her hair in a bun, just like what Theo was describing her at the beginning of how she is in class. And all of a sudden she has those glasses and put it on the tip of her nose. And all of a sudden Theo looks and he's like, whoa, what? Like she's back to what I was thinking of her. And she brought the tests over that he did today. It's crazy to think that this whole episode is all taking place in one day. And she gives the test to him, and he doesn't really want to open it. And eventually she's like, open it. And he gets an 89, which is a good job because 89 is pretty good. Like I feel like I was an 89% student in high school. I feel like that's how I was. And he hugs Mrs. Westlake, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh my god, wait a minute, why did I hug Mrs. Westlake? And he's just like in shock. And Theo says like, this test was hard. And Mrs. Westlake said, yeah, well, there was one student that didn't even make it past problem number 3, which we're talking about cockroach right there. And Cliff and Claire come in, and Theo gives the test to them. And Cliff sees it, and he saw the 89, but he like rubs his eyes, and he's like, am I really seeing an 89? And he tells Claire, oh, he got a 68, because if you turn the background, there's a few episodes in the series where like, a number is like upside down to make a joke. This is one of them, I feel like. You'll see more of these in the later episodes. And Claire was like, oh, not happy. Like, you could have done better. And then she looks at the test. Oh, no, it's 89. Oh, my God, good job. You did a great job. You know, they're happy. And so it's later in the evening, and Theo's test is on the door. Cliff comes into the bedroom and asks Theo if he had a wonderful time today. And Theo says, yeah, I did have a wonderful time. Theo says that, he doesn't have another test for another 3 weeks, so the pressure is kind of off of him. And Cliff says that, Theo studied the whole week and this is what he got in results. And Cliff talks about, his study habits when he was in med school, and that, knowing a test is coming and, waiting till the night before and inhale all of this in one night, and then you just pass. And this is what Theo studying habit isn't the greatest studying method to have. And so Cliff talks about his professor, saying, think of yourself as an airplane. You take off and you burn a lot of fuel when you do the takeoff. But once you get up and level off, you have less fuel burned off. But the way that Theo does his studying is he takes off and then he lands. And he just does this every time. Takes off and he lands. Takes off and then he lands. And the passengers are just getting nervous and nauseous. And so he says, you need to basically say, like, you need to study over time. You can't just be studying all last minute. I at some point in my life, I was that person who studied last minute. It's not the greatest because you're not learning from that. You're learning for that moment, for the next day, for that test. But then after that, you forget everything. And then especially if it's just a test and then you have a final exam later on, it's way worse. So it's better to study over a period of time, a couple hours every day. It is hard sometimes because you're like, there's your favorite TV show, like the Cosby show's on, or A Different World is on TV, and you're a little distracted and, you don't want to study. So, it's hard sometimes, but you got to do it over a period of time. And so Cliff says, I think, we should go downstairs and get some desserts. And Theo says, oh, I don't know about that. Dessert is like an airplane. Once you get to a certain weight, you got to cut back on the fuel. And he hits Cliff's stomach. I feel like this is a little fat shaming what is happening. It's not really fat shaming. Well, sorry, it is fat shaming, but, in a way, like, Cliff isn't fat, but, like, shaming his stomach. Of course, this episode was in the 80s, so it's not, the way they talk about certain things are not as great. So I didn't like this part. I was like, you can't, like, people in certain way, people that are heavier could be healthier than someone that's skinnier. So I didn't like that they're using his stomach. And we're going to see that a lot throughout the series about, he needs to lose weight. Of course, Cliff is at an age where, you got to worry about your diets, but I don't know. It's just that in particular kind of bothered me right there. And Cliff says he flies at a lower than Theo, and we end the episode right there. So we had 2 guest stars. So we had I think her name is Sonia Bergetta. I'm saying that wrong. I'm sorry to her. She's been acting a lot. She acted a lot before the Cosby Show. It seemed like more of a Latino stuff before Cosby Show, and then she has continued on to being on so many things, including Sex and the City, American Family, Luke Cage, and she's currently in pre-production for a movie called Shotgun Wedding with Jennifer Lopez and Lisa Bonet's ex-husband Lenny Kravitz. So that's cool. So it would be so cool to end up watching this movie. Matt Williams, who played Jake, he's not really an actor. He's only done one other acting before, but what's cool to hear about, like, I'm just finding this out now. I didn't know this until I saw this, but he's a writer, and he wrote he's a writer and producer, and he wrote the pilot episode of A Different World. I'm just gonna let you know we're gonna end up doing A Different World at some point this year, but First season, I don't really like of A Different Worlds. So sorry to Matt, you didn't really make. And also A Different World, when we go through A Different World, I'm hoping we're going to find out there was, after season 1, that the majority of the writers were black, because this is a show about HBCU, and I don't want white writers writing about HBCUs. But we'll find that out. But yeah, so he wrote in season 1. Season 1 isn't my favorite. But he wrote for The Cosby Show. He's written 17 episodes of The Cosby Show within season 2 and season 3. And he is also, he was a producer at some point for The Cosby Show within season 2 and season 3. He's created the show Home Improvement, which I enjoyed when I was a kid. I would watch it like every day at 5 p.m. or something like that. It was a really good show. And then he also created the show Roseanne. Never seen that show. And I guess I'm glad I'd never seen that show with all the controversies, all the issues that they've had in the last few years. He's also been the executive producer and producer on What Men Want, What Women Want. Which is cool because he's worked with Taraji P. Henson and the producer Will Packer, which I hope to one day, putting this out and manifesting, is that I will work with Will Packer. Let's manifest that, okay? To my audience here, we're manifesting that I will work with Will Packer. I really want to be on create black content, so I hope to work with him one day. But yeah, so Matt was able to work with Will Packer on What Men Want. And so those are the 2 guest stars from this episode. And so the lesson for this episode is that if you work hard, you can achieve anything that you dream of. That's literally what Mrs. Westlake said about her life. She was like, as long as I worked hard, I would get whatever I would want. And that is why she pushes Theo so much. And so that is the lesson for this episode. And the question that I have for you, and this is more of a yes or no question. It's not really like a open-ended question. Have you ever crammed for an exam or a test? Let me know, yes or no, using the hashtag Westlake on Twitter, on Instagram, at Black TV Shows Pod. I will say for myself, yes, I have crammed so many times. It's not the best method. I tend to forget things. I remember, trying to cram for biochemistry. Not a good idea. Not good. So let me know. And so the next episode is episode 36, season 2, episode 13, The Auction. And I will see you all on the next episode.